talking to you all today. A warm welcome to those of you who are joining us for the very first time. We're going to be joined today by Father Jeremy Haselock, who's going to be talking to us about the Annunciation, which on today, March 25th, it's the feast day of. But before we get into the lecture, the first 10 minutes, we talk about Church of the Week. And this week, we've got a really special church to talk to you about. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to our Chief Executive, Peter Ayres, who's going to tell you more about today's Church of the Week. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Church of the Week. Now, this week, again, as I always say every week, but this one is an absolute beauty. This is All Saints Conington, and with its fine tower, it stands watch over the surrounding countryside, and it can be seen by passenger trains from King's Cross to Edinburgh and by drivers on the Great North Road. The Tower of All Saints is truly monumental. It is, as I say, a beautiful, beautiful church. The estate of Conington belonged to Maud, niece of William the Conqueror, who married David, son of the Scottish King Malcolm, in 1109. Conington remained part of Scotland until 1237 and was eventually passed to the Cotton family, whose gloriously opulent monuments spanning 3 centuries are held in the church today, together with memorials to a Scottish king and a prince. It's quite an unassuming place today, but what a history it holds. The Domesday Book records the presence of a church close to here in 1086, but the present building dates almost certainly from the 15th century. Arguments for a later date have been suggested, perhaps in the reign of Queen Mary Tudor. Whatever the date, the quality of design and execution of detail in the main fabric strongly suggests the hand of a single architect. Interestingly, the original church did not carry the dedication of All Saints, but was dedicated to Our Lady, an apt choice for Church of the Week today. Today's lecture will be exploring how the Annunciation was depicted in medieval art, and the reason we selected All Saints Conington today is because it's home to a little-known potential national treasure. According to Nicholas Pevsner, this chair that you can see on the screen dates to the 14th century. Now, legend has it that it once belonged to the abbot of Peterborough Abbey, and after the dissolution of the monastery, it made its way to Fotheringhay Castle. And again, according to legend, it was sat in by Mary, Queen of Scots, before her execution at the castle on the 8th of February, 1587. And why let legend get in the way of a good story is what I always say. Please notice the Virgin Mary depicted by a vase of lilies, the angel Gabriel on the left, and the armrests comprised of 2 angels. Inside the church, there lies a treasure trove of monuments to individuals with fascinating stories, such as, let me change the screen for you, such as Robert Cotton, Sir Robert Cotton, the celebrated antiquary who assembled manuscripts form the basis of the British Library. You can see his effigy and monument right here. And lying on the floor of the South Chapel is the earliest monument in the church, which was carved in around 1330 and is likely to be an effigy of Bernard de Bruce, the lord of the manor and patron of the church, who died sometime in 1832-33 when he was in his early 20s. The effigy is carved Purbeck marble and depicts the religious garments of the order of a member of the Third Order of St. Francis. The figure is vested in a long cowled habit with a knotted cord at the waist, worn over a tunic of mail, the head being supported by 2 cushions. The armour is particularly interesting, as under the cowl of the monk's habit can be made out a chainmail hood, and above the hood we can make out a helmet. This is what makes this particular monument so interesting and unique. A nobleman depicted wearing items of clothing that are completely at odds with one another. That of a religious monk and those of a knight ready for war. Well, apart from maybe the fighting orders that there were as well. Now, interestingly, this church, and I've actually selected the wrong slides to open at the moment. What's interesting about this church, I'm going to take you back to the top as well, because actually during the Second World War, this church was very significant as well, because Glatton Air Base, which was very nearby, and it lay mostly in the parish of Conington, was built by the 809th Engineer Battalion of the US Army in the last months of 1942. Unusually, the base's 3 runways surrounded Rose Court Farm, which remained a working farm despite its proximity to the takeoffs and landings of the 4-engined B-17 Flying Fortresses. The 457th Bomb Group unfortunately lost 83 aircraft in action, and the group has a memorial to the men who died serving from Glatton Pace here in Conington Churchyard, and there's also a book of remembrance in the church itself. I think this is a very significant building. It lies in what you might call now a very, very sleepy village, but what a story it tells. And that goes for many, many, many of our historic parish churches. Thank you, George.
Thanks so much, Pete. And that really is, you know, I know we say it every week, but that was a gem of a church. And I suppose at the Trust, we're really lucky to look after so many historic churches on behalf of the nation. So, as everyone, normally now we've got 4 minutes till we kick off the lecture. So in the next 4 minutes, we're just going to do a couple of questions. Now, some questions have come in last week, but this is your opportunity, everyone, to ask our Chief Executive any questions you might have. Now, you can comment below, and if we don't have time today, we'll do them next week, or you can email me at digital@thecct.org.uk with any questions you'd like to ask. Now, Peter, I suppose this links in with Conington, but we've had some questions come in, and there's been a lot of support from the government lately for historic churches in the form of the Cultural Recovery Fund and the Heritage Stimulus Fund. How have we at the CCT benefited from that, and how have we been putting that funding to good use?
Yeah, as we've said week after week, your support, you as the viewers' support, is hugely important to the Church's Conservation Trust. But over COVID, although we have lost out on a great deal of income for the work that we do, we've also benefited from the Heritage Stimulus Fund, and we're really grateful to Historic England and to the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, who put this money up. And the purpose of the money was to get works on site, to protect the businesses of those people who have traditional building skills businesses, but also to repair some buildings. And fantastically, we've been able to undertake a programme of £1.6 million worth of work across our portfolio. I think it affects about 24 of our churches, for which we're really grateful. Our teams have turned out every possible way of doing this, and they've worked extremely hard because they only had from October to the end of this month to deliver £1.6 million worth of work on historic buildings, which, as I'm sure many of you know, that's not an easy thing to do. Now, as part of that, we had to put up 20% of the funding, so that's over £300,000 of our own money to put into those bids as well. So it's been great for the buildings, and as I say, we're really grateful to have been able to undertake a great deal of repair as well.
Thanks, Peter. And I know I've been fortunate enough to go to Bungay, the Private Church of St Mary the Virgin in Bungay this week, and over a couple of weeks, and see some of the work our conservation team and our suppliers have been undertaking. It's been breathtaking, not only the quality of workmanship going in, but also at the speed they're having to operate. So I know we'll be sharing some updates with our audiences very shortly.
Yeah, no, I think it's incredible, and certainly all the contractors who've been involved have been working their socks off to get this stuff done, because they've all been highly motivated to get the works finished in time to make sure that we protect those grants, Conington being among those as well. So yeah, it's been brilliant effort by everyone. Thanks,
Peter. And another question that came in last week was someone's asked, what is our relationship with the Historic Chapels Trust? Because someone's very sort of noticed that we share the same address. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, the Historic Chapels Trust, we've been working very closely with the Historic Chapels Trust for the last few years. Basically, we've sort of taken over the day-to-day running of them. They still have a board of trustees and they're an independent charity, but we provide the administration and the maintenance work and the repair works for them at the moment. It's just a good combination of two charities that do the same thing. A Historic Chapels Trust basically owns a collection of 20 fantastic non-Church of England places of worship right across the country. They've got Catholic chapels, Quaker meeting houses, Methodist chapels and things such as these. Fantastic collection, and we basically support them, look after that portfolio.
Thanks, Peter. I think that brings sort of question time for this week in Church Week to an end. I've just seen there's been a couple of questions coming about how long these lectures are going to go on for. And I suppose, Peter, it's we've sort of been overwhelmed, and you've already touched on it, by the support from people, and I'm really excited to say that for the time being we're booked up now until November. I know last week we said no October, but actually we've had more lectures confirmed this week, so we've got lectures booked up right up until November. So if any of you watching have ideas for future topics you'd like us to cover, please do comment away and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
Oh,
sorry, I was just going to say, it's a huge testament to all of you people who are watching. Thank you so much for your support. You can't tell, I really can't express how much good it's done for all of our team to know that you're all there, you're all interested, and you're all participating and taking part. Thank you to all of those who've joined us as members. That's hugely significant, and all of those who've donated as well. But if you love these lectures, keep supporting them, keep liking them on Facebook and sharing them with your friends as well, because as long as we've got an audience, we're going to keep doing these lectures because we think they're fantastic. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Peter. Well, you heard it from Peter himself there. As long as you keep supporting us and there's that, you keep watching and sharing them, we're going to keep doing these lectures. But I know next week we've got a really exciting announcement to make about the lectures. So do make sure you join us for next week's lecture. But you're here for today's lecture. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you about today's lecture. So as I said, we are going to be joined by Father Jeremy Haselock, who's going to be talking to us about the Annunciation and how it was depicted in medieval art and churches. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, especially a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do use that comment box throughout this lecture. Do comment away with your questions you have, but do tell us where you're watching from, because we love to say hello and see where people are joining us from. But if you are joining us for the first time, I'm just going to quickly run through how these lectures work. So as I said, you can always comment on the side there if you've got any questions or any problems, and we'll do our best to help. Alternatively, just send us a direct message if you've got a problem. Now, if you found it a bit tricky getting into these lectures, we are working on a long-term solution. But in the short term, if you make sure that you both like and follow our main Facebook account, you will get a free notification from Facebook whenever we go live with these lectures. And I know a lot of people have found this feature really helpful. Now, we've got a couple of video tutorials that if you'd like a link to, comment away and I can send you the link to those tutorials which show you how to like and follow our page. Our lectures are always free of charge. We never ask for credit card details for you to enjoy or access them. So if you see any spammers spamming the links below, sort of telling you to watch elsewhere, please don't click them, because our lectures are always free of charge. We also record all of the lectures, and those are also available free of charge. You can watch them on our Facebook video playlist. Again, we'll post some links later on with links to those, as well as onto our YouTube channel. Now, as Peter said, if you are enjoying these lectures, please do consider supporting us. You can do that in a number of ways. You can donate completely securely through our website, which is visitchurches.org.uk. You can donate by text, so you can send a text message, and all you do is text the letters CCT to 70331, and that will give us a gift of £3. Or you can become a member with us. So that's just from £3.50 a month. Now, if you do that by direct debit, and when you go to checkout, if you make sure you use the offer code lecture, and that's lecture in capitals, you'll get not one, not two, but three free guidebooks from some of our churches. Now, I've shown St. John on the Wall, Bristol for a few weeks, so I'm going to tell you about Cambridge All Saints and show you some pictures. But it's really, these guidebooks are wonderful. They've got some great facts and figures in there, but they've got some really incredible detail shots of our church. So here you can see the pulpit at Cambridge All Saints, which is a fantastic church that we've done we did Church of the Week a few weeks ago for our Arts and Crafts lecture. But as I said, if you join by direct debit from £3.50 a month, you'll get a free copies of that. Now, finally, those of you who joined us last week for our book launch will have known that we launched a book with Shire last week called Church Curiosities, Strange Objects and Bizarre Legends. Now, we sold out of these. However, we were able to get some more stock in. It's there. We've got them now. And we've already sold quite a few of them. So we've only got 30 copies left. So if you'd like to buy that, the RRP is £9.99, but we're selling it for £8 plus postage and packaging. There is a link to our shop page in this lecture at the top. But again, if you want a link, just comment and I can send you a direct link. Now, that's enough from me today, but I'm going to pass you over to Peter Ayres now, who's going to tell you a bit more about our lecture. But if you've got any questions, any problems, please do comment away.
Sorry, I did the classic I'm on mute moment there for you all. Sorry about that. Well, today you're in for a treat. So today's lecture is from Canon Jeremy Haselock, who retired actually in 2017 after 18 years as Canon Precentor of Norwich Cathedral, for the last 12 of which he was also Vice Dean. He was for 10 years a member of the Liturgical Commission of the Church of England, for 7 years a member of the Cathedrals Fabric Commission for England, and for a further 5 years as a member of its Liturgical Furnishings Committee. He has served on the Diocesan Advisory Committee of Committees of Chichester and Norwich Dioceses, and remains a stained glass advisor to the Norwich Diocesan Advisory Committee. He's a member of the Fabric Advisory Committee of Lincoln Minster. He holds postgraduate degrees in medieval art and is a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. He is also chaplain to Her Majesty The Queen. So as you can see, this man is no stranger to committees and has been imparting his advice for many, many years. They're not always easy environments, I can tell you, and it's brilliant. But today he's promised us a fantastic lecture, and I will give you the summary he gave me before we started. He said he's going to start in the catacombs and he's going to end in the Reformation. Now that is quite a journey to go on. So without further ado, may I refer you to Father Jeremy, who's going to give today's lecture. Thank you very much.
Hello, here I am. The event known to Christians as the Annunciation, or more properly, the Annunciation of our Lord Jesus Christ to the Blessed Virgin Mary, is recorded in the Gospel of St. Luke in chapter 1, verses 26 to 38. Introducing the story, the evangelist provides very little detail to help us visualize the scene. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But despite the paucity of visual detail to stimulate the artistic imagination, the Annunciation is among the most consistently depicted subjects in medieval iconography. It's found in everything from early Christian catacomb paintings to medieval books of hours, stained glass, alabaster tablets, panel paintings, and even monumental brasses. The lack of detail in the New Testament account had the stimulating effect of setting the artistic imagination free, and while we shall see the depiction of the event settle into a deliberately formulaic image, its compositions and details can vary enormously in accordance with the setting. The Virgin might appear on a throne, in a loggia, in a bedroom or oratory, or outdoors, and she can be shown spinning or reading. Perhaps the oldest surviving representation of the Annunciation is found in the catacombs of Priscilla on the Via Salaria in Rome, a May date from the second half of the 2nd century AD. I've reversed this image to show the figures of the angel and the Virgin in the positions in which they will appear in countless representations over the next millennium. Generally speaking, Gabriel hastens in with his news from the left. Mary sits or stands on the right, calmly or occasionally exhibiting an element of surprise, as in this image from the 10th century benedictional of St. Ethelwald. Dynamism or stasis, sometimes both together, will be features of the medieval Annunciation images we shall be looking at today. These two Anglo-Saxon representations, separated by over 200 years, demonstrate my point. The Northumbrian Ruthrell cross, dating from around 750, is all stillness and peace, whereas in the page from the benedictional of circa 970, the angel blows in with a flourish, billowing purple drapery all round him, to speak to the Virgin who sits calmly reading the scriptures. Now, the transmission of design motifs in medieval art via portable artworks is an interesting subject in its own right. But in parenthesis here, and please forgive me, I'm fascinated by the similarities between this image in the Ethelwald benedictional and a panel on the ivory Brunswick casket of 100 years earlier. Just look at the aedicule beneath which the Virgin sits, and the way her hand rests on the open book on the lectern before her. 200 years later, the mid-12th century Psalter of Henry of Blois, Winchester work, recalls the sculptured stillness of Ruthwell. And right at the end of the period we are considering, in the 1492 memorial brass to Sir George Reed, rector of the parish of FAVOURED in Wiltshire, we see the dynamism, not in the behavior of the angel, who meekly kneels before the Virgin, but in the action of the Holy Spirit, who slides down on rays of glory from heaven to quicken Mary's womb with a word in her ear. Gabriel's announcement to Mary, the salutation by which salvation history was begun, as it's been called, has been celebrated on March 25th since the earliest times. The celebration of the Incarnation inaugurates the Christological narrative that governs the dates of the fixed feasts of the liturgical year. So it's unsurprising that this event should be highlighted in medieval calendars, where the most significant feasts or celebration are often written in gold or red ink, hence the phrase red letter days, which we still use today. This Psalter in the British Library is from northern France, written and illuminated around 1320, and reflects the liturgical use of the Diocese of St. Omer. But the calendar pages are typical of Psalters produced in England at the same time. It's been asserted by some that the proximity of March the 25th to the start of spring led many to treat the feast as the beginning of the new year. Certainly in England, from the late 12th century right up until 1752, the new year was dated from the 25th of March. But I would suggest that the start of this custom had more to do with liturgy and theology than with the turn of the seasons. Yes, it seemed appropriate to medieval preachers to describe Mary with vocabulary associated with the spring. The Annunciation appeared to inaugurate the season, and so the rebirth of humankind met the rebirth of nature. Some early fathers even asserted that the Annunciation coincided with the first springtime of creation and described it as the springtime feast of feasts. But there is more. Every now and again, Good Friday falls on the 25th of March because of the way in which the movable feast of Easter interacts with the calendar of fixed feasts. In this calendar from a Psalter of 1220 or so, produced in Oxford, the phenomenon is noted. It's a rare occurrence, but it has happened twice in recent years, in 2005 and again in 2016. Alas, it won't occur again until 2157. Even though it is hinted at in the Book of Common Prayer Collect for the Annunciation, the conjunction of the two feasts has been regarded in England as an ill omen, hence the couplet, "When Our Lady falls in our Lord's lap, then England beware a sad mishap." But when the day does happen, it falls on its true date in patristic and medieval tradition. March the 25th was considered to be the historical date of the crucifixion of Christ, and the conjunction was supposed to be both deliberate and rich in meaning. The date of the Annunciation was chosen to correspond with the supposed historical date of the crucifixion, as deduced from the gospel evidence, in order to emphasize the idea that Christ came into the world on the same day that he left it, his life forming a perfect circle. This tidy cyclical concept goes back to at least the 3rd century, and in the 5th century, St. Augustine of Hippo preached about it. the Old English Martyrology, a compilation of saints' lives and religious miscellanea put together in the late 9th century, is quite clear. It reads, "On the 25th day of the month, Gabriel first came to St. Mary with God's message. And on that date, Mary conceived in the city of Nazareth through the angel's word and through the hearing of her ears. And then, after 32 years and 3 months, Christ was crucified on the cross on the same day." At the end of the 14th century, this idea inspired a distinctive and beautiful image found almost exclusively in English medieval art, the lily crucifix. This iconographic form unites the Annunciation and crucifixion by depicting Christ crucified upon the lily, which was already a regular ingredient in the Annunciation scene. The lily is one of the symbols of Mary's purity, but transformed in this way, it also evokes the tree of Jesse, the diagrammatic representation of the genealogy of Christ, and the tree of the cross. The otherwise rather undistinguished Llanbeblig Hours in the National Library of Wales, dating from the end of the 14th century, has a double-page miniature of the Annunciation with Christ very clearly crucified on the lily. It's been estimated that there are 19 examples of this iconographic form in English medieval art in a variety of media. There is a fine example from the late 14th century among the Tree of Jesse figures painted on the Lady Chapel ceiling in St. Helens, Abingdon. In stained glass, the lily crucifix can be found famously in Holy Trinity, Long Melford, and less well known perhaps in St. Michael at the Northgate in Oxford. Both these examples were probably once part of a larger window depicting the whole Annunciation scene, as the image on its own, devoid of context, has little meaning. Having said that, the large 15th century wall painting of the lily crucifixion on its own forms a reredos for a side altar in God's Hill Church on the Isle of Wight, where it could be said to derive its meaning from the Mass offered daily before it. The Victoria and Albert Museum has an alabaster panel in its extensive collection of these things, which is housed in a wooden shrine or case with painted doors. The panel, before it was damaged, probably deliberately, would have shown the Annunciation in its lower portion and the Holy Trinity in the upper half. Heaven and earth are united by the lily, which grows tall and strong from the lower part to become a crucifix bearing the second person of the Trinity before the mercy seat. Before damage, the upper portion would have looked much like the second image on this slide. To the best of my knowledge, this particular iconographic device is unique. The paintings on the case are South German in style of about 1400, which together with the provenance of the piece suggests that this was one of the many English alabaster panels exported to continental Europe before the Reformation. And finally, just to illustrate yet another medium, this time wood carving, St. Bartholomew's Tong in Staffordshire has a misericord of the Annunciation with a lily crucifix from around 1480 in the surviving choir stalls of what was in the 15th century a large collegiate church. This is unique among English misericords. Before we look at the medieval representations of the Annunciation to be found in some of our parish churches and public collections, I'd like briefly to explore an aspect of the devotion still significant in our country today. In Nazareth, beneath this basilica, constructed between 1960 and 1969, lie the remains of a Constantinian church built around a grotto which tradition holds to be the house where the Annunciation actually took place. It is said that in the 13th century, the stones of this house were somehow transported to Italy and re-erected in the town of Loreto on a plan exactly matching the foundations in Nazareth. One explanation to this is that a merchant family called D'Angelo removed the stones when pilgrimage to Nazareth became difficult, transported them in one of their ships, and rebuilt the house in a more accessible location. Far more romantic is the legend that the house took flight, literally borne up by the angels, who took the house first to Trosat in present-day Croatia, and then presumably, after a rest, on to Loreto on the other side of the Adriatic. In its new location, the little house, now richly clad in a Renaissance marble screen, became and still is an important place of pilgrimage for those for whom the mystery of the Incarnation is a foundation of their faith. Strange as this story is, it has elements in it which are not entirely unique. According to legend, 2 centuries earlier, in the 11th century Norfolk, a noblewoman, Richeldis de Faverges, was instructed by the Blessed Virgin Mary to build a replica of the Nazareth house. Mary thoughtfully provided the exact dimensions, and to use it as a place of prayer and meditation on the mystery of the Incarnation. Cutting a long story short and omitting a more likely chronology, Walsingham, where this vision occurred, and the replica of the Holy House soon became an increasingly popular place of pilgrimage. Rumours of miracles and answers to prayer drew folk from all over the country to this remote place, and in 1153, a substantial priory church and associated community buildings were begun by Austin canons. Generous donations enabled the church to be vastly extended between 1360 and 1390, and building activity continued well into the mid-15th century. The Holy House was contained in a separate structure immediately to the north of the main church building, and perhaps, and only perhaps, looked somewhat like the 1930s structure built elsewhere in the village after the pilgrimage had been restored. Certainly, the medieval Holy House contained an image of the Virgin and Child. Its likeness was preserved on the seal of the priory, which enabled the 20th century restorer of this shrine, the Reverend Arthur Hope Patton, to commission a new image. The original image was said to have been taken to London and burned after the shrine was suppressed by Henry VIII in 1538. But an image of the same style and date, probably the same size, and with provision for a detachable crown, is now in the collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum. Might this be the original image of Our Lady of Walsingham? The notion, along with the date of the establishment of the original shrine, is currently under scholarly debate. The image aside, the original devotional focus of the pilgrimage was the Holy House itself and its association with the place of the Annunciation. This is confirmed by some of the lead pilgrim badges made to be sold as souvenirs and which have survived in significant numbers. As you can see from these replicas, one depicts the Holy House with a representation of the Annunciation within, and another shows just the Annunciation on its own. The chapter house of Westminster Abbey, built in the 1250s, contains perhaps one of the finest sculptured Annunciation groups in England. The life-size figures of Gabriel and Mary are 2 of the best pieces of English sculpture to survive from the 13th century. Mary stands on the right hand, her right hand raised and her left holding a book. Gabriel, his wings now missing, is on the left, leaning slightly back and outwards to stretch out his arms towards the Virgin. The spandrels carried large trefoils with reliefs of sensing angels. Their presence in an Annunciation tableau is unusual, as Gabriel usually appears alone. The figures were originally coloured. The face of the Virgin retains a surprising amount of original paint. And there are slots in the body of Gabriel where once his wings were attached, probably made of wood and gilded. Gabriel's mouth is open in speech, the earliest example we know of Gabriel visibly uttering the words of salutation. The dynamism of mid-14th century portrayals of the Annunciation, which would have been even more evident here when Gabriel's wings, open wings, were in place, owes much to Franciscan preaching, which in its turn drew inspiration from St. Bernard's commentary on the Song of Songs, which was a much studied text in England. The Holy Spirit, leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills, reaches Mary before Gabriel, who hastens to say, "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." Here, the sensing angels must sense the Virgin, for the Holy Spirit is with her already, waiting for her assent. And Gabriel, who in St. Bernard's words, is beaten, overleapt by him who sent him ahead. On a much more humble level, the Annunciation scene, easily divided into two halves, provided an ideal subject for the spandrels on either side of entrance doors. Here, at St. Mary's Great Witchingham in Norfolk, the finely carved late 14th century Annunciation is set off by excellent flushwork, bearing the Maria Regina monogram. Fascinating how this evokes the chair we were shown earlier this morning. Another high-end product of the Westminster artistic milieu that produced the chapter house sculptures, albeit 60 years later, is the Toledo cope. Opus Anglicanum, English embroidery, was coveted by churchmen all over Europe, and this superb example, made between 1320 and 1330, was perhaps acquired in London by a Toledo-born cardinal on a diplomatic mission to the English court. The Annunciation in the central panel at the bottom is one of 7 Marian scenes on this prestige vestment. The even finer Pienza cope of roughly the same date has no less than 14 scenes from the life of the Virgin, including a fine Annunciation in the middle register of panels to the left of the centrally placed Nativity. The quality of the embroidery can be seen in this close-up image, and also a degree of closeness in style and iconographic approach to the Annunciation in the contemporary Holcomb Bible picture book. Nothing else is quite like this book. Produced in London under the supervision of a Dominican friar, it contains over 230 illustrations depicting scenes from the Old and New Testaments. Might it just have been intended as a booklet of designs, perhaps for an embroidery workshop? Who knows? The Chichester Constable chasuble in the V&A and some panels in the same collection with scenes from the life of the Virgin embroidered on a similar red velvet ground date from around 1345 and feature the Annunciation in a similar style with the Holy Dove en route for the Virgin's ear. Early writers developed a way of considering the conception of Jesus in Mary as an act of hearing. The idea was absorbed into Western thought through the writings of St. Bernard of Clairvaux. This manner of thinking made words the agent of conception, and thus the common iconographic convention of presenting Gabriel's words on a scroll between him and the Virgin, with the words Ave Maria, gratia plena. This prefatory miniature from the 15th century Beaufort Hours is a good example, along with other miniatures and this wall painting in Salisbury. In the Talbot Beauchamp hours of around 1430, a ray of light emanates from God the Father, and the Holy Spirit slides down its sparkling slope to hover over the Virgin's head, while Gabriel's written message heads towards her ear. Some artists, or their patrons maybe, sought to visualize something more compelling, the quickening of the Virgin's womb. In the attempt to show Mary's body at the precise moment her womb was quickened, various strategies had to be employed to emphasize how pure this moment was. Perhaps a ray of light issuing from the beak of the Holy Dove to Mary's ears, or to Mary's womb, as in the latter and slightly later part of the Beaufort Hours. Here the dove is most certainly heading for the Virgin's womb. Where drawing attention to that part of a woman's body seemed too risque, the ray of quickening light might be directed at the chest or head or ear. And lest the viewer doubt the truth of the virginal conception, sometimes a little Christ figure slides down the ray of light, diving towards his mother, as in this late 14th century panel painting from Bohemia and a panel from the 1455 Tops window in St. Peter Mancroft in Norwich. Mary's interior disposition at the Annunciation was the object of much speculation and consequent artistic interpretation. Was she reluctant, fearful, or accepting of her extraordinary mission? As in these stained glass panels now in museum collections, most representations try to convey a sense of gentle modesty and to steer away from reluctance or resistance. Her gesture, raised hand or hands, is usually of gentle, self-effacing humility. In the 14th century Annunciation window from St. John the Baptist Hadzer in Worcestershire, we see a thing of great beauty. Only the right-hand panel is original. The left-hand light is an excellent 19th century replacement by Hardman. You can find it in the Ely Stained Glass Museum. The 15th century stained glass from the Chapel of Hampton Court in Herefordshire is now divided between the Institute of Fine Arts in Boston, Massachusetts, and the Burrell Collection in Glasgow. The surviving medieval glass at All Saints' Bale in Norfolk is gathered in a window in the south aisle. Among the fragments of different scenes from a variety of dates, there are two substantial panels from an Annunciation window of high quality, probably dating from the last quarter of the 15th century. The Archangel's Latin scroll hails Mary as full of grace. Mary's confirms she is the handmaid of the Lord, as the Holy Dove approaches to overshadow her. Large-scale panels like these and those at Hadzer were both didactic and devotional in tension. Didactic in that religious art can be seen as a raid on the inarticulate. In 1005, a local synod at Arras in France proclaimed that art teaches the unlettered what they cannot learn from books. 300 years later, St. Bonaventure defined the visual as scripture made visible for those who were uneducated and could not read, and introduced the devotional element also as an aid to sluggish affections, for our emotion is aroused more by what is seen than what is heard, and the things we have seen remain with us more than the things we have heard. Contemplation of scenes from the life of the Virgin, including the Annunciation, as here in the east window of St. Peter and St. Paul East Harling, which dates from the 1470s, introduced viewers not only to scripture, but also to the more fantastical stories in the Golden Legend. This compilation of saints' lives and legends, arranged according to the liturgical calendar, was put together in the 1260s by Jacques de Varennes and became one of the most popular and widely read sources for medieval iconography. William Caxton translated it into English, and it was one of the first books he printed when he set up the first movable type press in Westminster in 1476. The early life of the Blessed Virgin Mary is not recorded in the New Testament, but an apocryphal text from the 2nd century, known as the Proto-Evangelium of St. James, contains tales of her miraculous conception, her upbringing, the circumstances surrounding her betrothal to St. Joseph, the birth of Jesus, and the miraculous events associated with his childhood. It also puts forward the suggestion that Mary remained a virgin during the birth of Jesus and afterwards. This and other so-called infancy gospels lay behind the Golden Legend accounts and were the chief source for the stories which inspired the artists and craftsmen who responded to the ever-growing demand for Marian art and objects of devotion. The east window of All Saints, North Street, York, has this wonderful and tender image of St. Anne teaching her daughter, the Blessed Virgin, to read. A fine example of the genre of Marian images drawn from the infancy Gospels. Such storied windows, richly dight as the East Harling East window, could have functioned as a form of reredos behind the altar in a chapel or chancel. Certainly, at the beginning of the 15th century, carved alabaster tables set in a wooden frame were beginning to become popular for that function. Alabaster was quarried in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. It was soft and easy to carve, took a polish very readily, and could be painted and gilded without difficulty. Alongside the production of large-scale monumental effigies and tomb chests, small, standard-sized panels were carved with readily recognizable scenes or figures and sold in their thousands as individual devotional pieces, or combined as narrative sequences into altarpieces. The Swansea altarpiece in the V&A is one of the few such altarpieces to survive in its original wooden case in this country. 4 episodes from the life of the Virgin, including the Annunciation, are framed by images of St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, while in the centre is a throne of mercy image of the Holy Trinity. There are at least 9 other recorded examples of intact English alabaster altarpieces depicting scenes from the life of the Virgin, surviving in Poland, France, Spain, and Italy, where they were exported in the Middle Ages. Scenes illustrative of the Passion of Christ, carved in alabaster and mounted in wooden frames, were equally common, judging from the number of surviving individual panels. The chapel at Haddon Hall in Derbyshire has a fine example with 9 panels which retain much of their original colour. However, over 50 panels or fragments of alabaster Annunciation scenes are known to survive, making it one of the most frequently depicted scenes in this medium. As you can see, they largely conform to the recognisable iconography you have come to know, but can vary slightly in design and layout. Numerous identical examples from the 15th century workshops bear witness to the use of pattern books or studio models, and the term churned out has been used to describe these mass-produced devotional items, which, like the Opus Anglicanum of a century earlier, found their way to churches and monasteries all over Europe. We've already seen this English Annunciation and Trinity in its South German case. But here also is a head of St. John the Baptist, equally produced as a devotional object for use either in a church or a private oratory. The devotion known as the Angelus is a commemoration and thanksgiving for the Incarnation focused on the Annunciation. It seems to have developed from advice issued by St. Bonaventure in 1269 that Franciscan friars should recite Ave Marias in response to the ringing of the evening bell for prayer. This was expanded in the 14th century to an Angelus recited in the morning and again at noon and in the evening. It achieved wide circulation and popularity among the laity, perhaps focused among the growing middle classes upon an alabaster shrine like this. It is a wonderful recapitulation of salvation history, with Mary's Ave greeting from the angel, beginning the work of redemption, completed on Good Friday. Her response makes her the inverse of Eva, and the means by which Eve's sin is turned to good. The Latin hymn Ave Maris Stella preserves the wordplay. Sumens illud Ave, Gabrielis ore, funda nos in pace, mutans Eve nomen. It's slightly lost in the English translation. When the salutation Gabriel had spoken, peace was shed upon us, Eva's bonds were broken. The Eva Ave reverse is illustrated in the Biblia Pauperum, or Pauper's Bible, a series of printed block book picture Bibles common from the end of the 14th century. These illustrated the typological correspondences between the Old and New Testament, a form of biblical interpretation first suggested by Origen and others in the 3rd century. Judging from the large numbers of surviving manuscripts and printed editions of these books throughout Europe, the laity were well versed in typological exegesis and could respond readily to their artistic expression. Generally, the New Testament image, the antitype, was placed in the center of the page as here, and the Old Testament types placed either side. The Annunciation here is flanked by images of Eve's disobedience on the left-hand side and Gideon's fleece here on the right-hand side, Gideon's fleece. The Eve parallel is reasonably clear to our minds today, but Gideon's fleece, wet with dew when the ground stayed dry and vice versa, related in the book of Judges, requires a little thought as a prefiguration of Christ's virginal conception. A similar but slightly more sophisticated illustrated compilation, the Speculum Humanae Salvationis, or Mirror of Man's Salvation, again hugely popular through Europe, has more text than illustrations to explain the typology. Here in this illustration, the Annunciation is prefigured by Moses' encounter with the burning bush, ablaze but not consumed by fire. The late 15th century historiated bosses in the nave vault of Norwich Cathedral are laid out on this typological principle, with the major bosses bearing the main story and the minor bosses carrying the types. Here is Moses, shoeless beside the burning bush, accompanying the boss of the Incarnation. Before I close, there are two further vehicles we should look at briefly, by which the mystery of the Annunciation was brought to the churchgoers' attention in pre-Reformation England. They are rood screens and wall paintings. Exceptionally, some rood screen dados were decorated with scenes from Scripture rather than the rows of apostles and patron saints we are familiar with. Here at Loddon in Norfolk, the early 16th century screen was vandalized at the Reformation, or perhaps during the interregnum, and then rather over-enthusiastically cleaned. But the surviving underdrawing has been reinforced, and the images, including the Annunciation, are recognizable. The selection of scenes on the screen is rather eclectic, probably reflecting the choice of the various donors as the screen was being financed. But the joys of the Virgin, of which the Annunciation is one, are prominent. You can also see on this slide the martyrdom of St. William of Norwich. Mural paintings executed on the plastered walls of our church interiors have probably suffered most at the hands of iconoclasts and well-meaning church restorers both. Puritan iconoclasts tended to whitewash over the offending pictures, thus to a certain extent preserving them. But the enthusiastic 19th century restorers ignorantly scraped away the paintings along with the plaster when they mistakenly stripped the interiors of the churches to reveal the stonework beneath. Some of the earliest wall paintings to survive in England are those of the so-called Lewis group, 5 churches in Sussex with extensive schemes of decoration by the same group of painters working at the very beginning of the 12th century. Perhaps the best known of these is St Botolph's Harden in West Sussex, where there are scenes from the life of St George and an extensive narrative scheme of 15 paintings of scenes from the infancy of Christ, including this Annunciation and Visitation to the right of the chancel arch. This didactic scheme included a running explanation, an explanatory inscription in Latin, of which only the portion above the Annunciation and Visitation remains. This reads, Virgo salutator, sterilis fecunda probatur. Probably best rendered, the Virgin is hailed, she who was barren is proved fruitful. While very few other Annunciation wall paintings have survived, there is a fine example to which I have referred earlier in the Lady Chapel of St Thomas's, Salisbury, a church best known for the magnificent doom scene painted over the chancel arch. Dating from the years after 1450, and again, as you see, paired with a visitation scene, this Annunciation, conventional in iconography, is painted as if on a panel hanging against a fictive red curtain, decorated with lilies in pots and heraldic devices. Well, I have far exceeded my allotted time, I think. So I will end with words from the Church of England's Book of Common Prayer, which sum up all we have seen. As we have known the incarnation of thy Son, Jesus Christ, by the message of an angel, so by his cross and passion, we may be brought unto the glory of his resurrection. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Jeremy. You won't be able to see, but the comments that are coming in are absolutely just breathtaking. So thank you so much. I'm just going to stop your screen sharing at the moment, Father, because we're about to go into question time. So we've had lots of questions coming already, but everyone, if you'd like to ask Father Jeremy any questions, now is your time and your opportunity to do so. So do comment away for below. But if we don't have time to put them all to Father Jeremy today, do keep them coming. If you're watching on YouTube or watching on Facebook later on, recatch or catching up, please keep them coming, because we do monitor the questions and we do our best to respond to you. But as we said at the start of this lecture, we're really excited that the lectures are continuing, and we're booked up now till November. And just to reiterate to everyone, these lectures are going to stay free of charge. We are not charging for these lunchtime lectures. They're always going to be free. So thank you so much for supporting them so passionately. Thank you for sharing them and just being an amazing, amazing support network for us at the Trust. As we said at the start, though, if you'd like to support us and show your support, please do like our account, do share these lectures, but do consider making a donation. So as we said at the start, if you would like to text donate, you can do so. So if you get your mobile phone and just text the letters CCT to 70331, that will give us a gift of £3, or you can donate any amount you wish to completely securely through our website, which is visitchurches.org.uk, or you can become a member with us. Now that is from just £3.50 per month, and if you do so by direct debit and at checkout, if you use the offer code lecture in capitals, you'll get free guidebooks from churches in our care. But as well as those guidebooks, there are lots of other rewards and benefits for you becoming a member, such as our 3 times a year you get a Pinnacle magazine. We do member exclusive events, and as I said, next week stay tuned, because there's going to be a really exciting announcement. Finally, I know you're all dying for these questions kicking, but before we go into them, just another reminder: if you joined us last week, or if you haven't joined us last week, do catch up. But you can buy David Castleton's brand new Shire book. The RRP for this, as I said, is £9.99, but you can buy it from us for just £8 plus postage and packaging. We'll comment with a link to the lecture book below. But we're going to dive into question time now. So Thank you so much, Father. There's been loads coming in, so I'm going to dive straight in. So if both the Annunciation and the Crucifixion fall on the same day, is this a first example of a closed circle?
The medieval mind, or really the post-patristic mind, was very, very keen on the idea of a cycle. And you get the term used, for example, in the cycle of mystery plays, when the whole of human salvation history from the creation to the Last Judgment were performed on wagons. They liked this idea of a cycle which had a beginning and an end. A closed cycle, well, I'm not so sure that it's closed. We should always be open to the prospect of the redemption, resurrection, and our own incorporation. But I don't want this to become a sermon. But it is interesting that this is a cyclical thing. It was very, very important to the medieval mind to believe that the Annunciation and the Crucifixion took place on the same day. It was clearly important in England because we have this unique iconography of the lily crucifix, which so stresses that wonderful closed cycle.
And for the second question, Father, we're looking at really patristics. I'm going to the early days of the church here, but was the date of the Annunciation established before the date of Christmas, or were the two dates set at the same time? And when did this happen approximately?
I was rather worried that this would come up because if you go onto the internet, you find so much rubbish talked about the date of Christmas. The date of the Annunciation came first. It's quite clear in earliest preaching and lectionaries, and the Christmas 9 months after came second. So the myth that Christmas is deliberately located on a Roman pagan feast is completely without foundation. It's 9 months after the Annunciation, which is on the 25th of March. The 25th of March was chosen because by various biblical calculations, it was decided that the crucifixion had taken place on the 25th of March. So you get the crucifixion date, you get the Annunciation date, you get the Christmas date. And that seems quite genuinely to have been the sequence in which the whole thing was worked out. So the idea of Christmas being a Christianized pagan feast is only very, very partially true. Yes, of course, St. Gregory advised his missionary saints, including St. Augustine, when he came to England, to Christianize pagan sites. But I think the Christianization of a Roman pagan festival to make it into Christmas is not a true story.
Thank you, Father. And for our third question, we've got here the cross and lily, usually arum lilies, often painted together at Easter. Does this come from the lily crucifix?
Yes.
Brilliant. That's a simple answer there. Thank you. Are there any examples of European influences on English Annunciation tableau?
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, I mentioned earlier in the lecture about the influence of portable works of art, making iconography pan-European. I mean, English artists traveled abroad. English artists received manuscripts and sometimes panel paintings and indeed carvings from continental Europe. So there was a cross-fertilization between the two. The English embroidered vestments traveled all over Europe, and where the iconography on them was influential. Certainly it has been said that Bohemian iconographic forms and artistic styles flooded into England in the late 14th century in the reign of Richard II, after he'd married Anne of Bohemia. Perhaps she brought in her train, when she came from Prague, a whole lot of artists and craftsmen, because certain manuscript illuminations and panel paintings, and indeed some of the alabasters we've seen, are clearly influenced by the soft German the Gothic style, or Bohemian Gothic style, that may well have come with her. So yes, of course, there was a lot of cross-fertilization, and continental iconography certainly influenced England before the Reformation. The other thing, of course, was, and I mentioned these, was the Biblia Pauperum and the Humanis Speculum Salvationis, which were printed books, block printed initially before movable type and then printed, and they circulated freely on both sides of the channel, and they had many illustrations in which would have influenced iconographic thought and development.
Thank you. That's really fascinating. And you said at the start, and you showed that lovely from Rome, where you'd reverse the image. You stated that Gabriel is normally depicted on the left-hand side and the Virgin on the right. Is there a particular significance between Mary being on the right and Gabriel on the left?
I don't think so. The vast majority of them are depicted that way around. But if you notice the doorway at Witchingham that I showed, the Great Witchingham sculpture in the spandrels there, you'll see that it's the other way around. And I forget now whether your chair, your recently discovered chair, is the other way around. But by far the majority of depictions had Gabriel zooming in from the left and Mary patiently on the right. Even Eastern Orthodox icons generally show the scene in that particular way. I'm not sure there's any significance about it.
Thank you. And I think this is quite an interesting question, because I know when we go into lots of churches today, we often find the Lady Chapel blue cushions, or we see the Mothers Union banner in blue, and all this idea about colours. But when did the Blessed Virgin start dressed in blue? Was it just because of the high valuable status the colour blue had generally, or is there more to the colour blue?
Well, first of all, it's really a myth that the Virgin is always dressed in blue. If you examine paintings all the way around, you'll find that blue is not necessarily the predominant colour. Post-Reformation Protestantism rather liked the idea of blue being sort of to do with the Virgin Mary. Hence, we get the appalling church furnishing schemes in shades of blue that I rather deprecate. But blue was certainly made from precious stone, lapis lazuli, ground fine, and mixed when used for illuminations, manuscript painting, and sometimes in panel painting and canvas painting also. It was a very high quality prestige colour, and therefore it did well to be associated with the Blessed Virgin. But I don't know any textual sources whereby blue is given a particular significance in the in relation to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And indeed, I think if you look at the bulk of the images, particularly the early images, blue is not there. Admittedly, the stained glass I've been showing you today and some of the alabasters had blue colour involved, but it's only in proportion to other colours used on the figure. Generally speaking, the Virgin Mary has a gold or white robe with a blue cloak over the top, but the cloak is not always blue.
And I suppose linking to that, are there any depictions which show the scene of the Annunciation where Mary might look scared or quite nervous about what's to happen, or is she generally shown to be quite calm and receptive to what's about to happen?
Well, we're looking in this lecture at English medieval examples with one or two small exceptions. And in most of those, she seems to have, adopt perhaps a slightly shocked occasionally with her hands held up like that. But generally, she's calm and placid. Now, you need to ask why that is the case. And I think you need to look at the sources for so much iconography, later iconography, were sermon material, popular preaching by Franciscan and Dominican friars. And they took their sermon material from the writings of earlier people. I've mentioned St. Bernard of Clairvaux quite a few times in the course of the lecture, and he was very influential on his sermons and writings were very influential on such things as the interior disposition of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Was she calm and resigned? It suits the theological purpose that she was meek, submissive, and generally placid. But I reckon if an angel suddenly burst in on me when I was happily saying my office, I would be pretty surprised. I think it's quite important, though, that we do realise that iconography, the artistic expression, usually comes second to literary sources. And then only later on did they start to cross-fertilize, and literary sources reflect what the people had seen in artistic representations. But certainly mendicant preaching and the study of devotional works by people like St. Bernard of Clairvaux were instrumental in setting the trends.
Thank you so much, Father. And I think that brings us to the end of our allotted time for today. So thank you very much, Father, for your lecture today. As I said, there's been some fantastic questions and comments today. If we didn't have time to answer your question today, don't worry, I'll be going through them and I'll be trying my best to get answers to you. So do keep those questions coming. Now, before everyone leaves, firstly, those who've been asking, yes, Clement's snoring again behind me. Yeah, hopefully he didn't interrupt the lecture this week. I know last week he was snoring and he popped up on screen. But next week, as I said, we've got some really exciting announcements next week to make, so do make sure you join us next week. But it's a really important week. It's Holy Week. So at the Trust, we're going to be sharing lots of stories, some really interesting facts about our churches. But next week's lecture falls on Maundy Thursday. So for next week, during lockdown, we can't go away on holiday at the moment. It's looking that we're not going to be able to go abroad. So we're taking you abroad virtually next week. So we're going to be traveling to Padua. We're going to be looking at the Scrivini Chapel and Giotto's frescoes there. And that's going to be given by Dr. Richard Stemp, who's written several books and is a real expert on Giotto's work there. So do join us next Thursday for our lunchtime lecture. But thank you everyone for all of your suggestions. I've seen there's been lots of ideas coming in for future lectures. Please do keep them coming. And as always, if you've got any feedback, if you want to suggest any lecture to us, do comment away. But also you can send me an email. So as I said at the start, my email is digital@thecct.org.uk. But thank you everyone for joining us again. Thank you, Father Jeremy, for taking time to talk to us. And we look forward to seeing everyone at a future lunchtime lecture.